Hi, my name is Alice Peretzian. I was born in Cuba of Armenian parents. My father was from Sebastián, specifically from Kochasar, and my mother was from Aintab. My mom's dad was a widower with 6 children, and he had recently married at that time, remarried, and he decided he would have to go into the army, the Turkish army, in order to protect his family. And he dug a hole in the wall in the basement, and it made it like an L shape, and told his wife not to tell the children anything about it, because he would return and stay there until they were able to leave Aintab. And so he did. He was gone for 3 weeks and came back one night late and told the wife, I'm going to stay in that wall. Do not tell the children, just bring me food at night and we'll take it from there. I guess the army came in several times looking for him. They walked right by that wall, never seeing it, never seeing the hole, never hearing anything, and they left several times. And one night he decided that was the night, and he told the wife that the following night they would be on the road. They had a cart, and he said to her, just pack just the necessary things, and we'll wake the children up and put them in there and we'll take off. And so they did. And they went to Aleppo, where they lived the rest of their lives. My mother, evidently, later on, migrated to Cuba to be with her sister, who was there already. In the meantime, my father was about maybe 8 or 9 years old, and the Turks came in and they started slaughtering everybody.
So that was 1915?
1915.
Okay.
1915. And they slaughtered his whole family. In fact, we had a problem with him because whenever we took the children to my parents' house, the minute the children would cry, babies, newborns crying, he would take off. He would leave the house. And one day I said, you know, Dad, get used to this. They're children. That's going to happen. He says, you don't understand. I asked him, what don't I understand? They're children. He said, sit down, I'll tell you the story. He had never, ever spoken about this before, not once. And he said that when the Turks came in and they slaughtered the family, they also slaughtered his brother, who was a baby. And they tied his legs to 2 horses, and he was screaming, and that's all he hears. And they let the horses run, and then you can take it from there in your mind, which is an incredible, incredible thing. Anyways, from that point on, I understood why he couldn't stay in the house when these things happen, the babies crying. How uncouth, how terrible. So today I think back, and even though I say to myself, you have to forget this, I can't. I can't forget it. It's very vivid in my mind, watching my dad crying as he was telling me the story. And I cannot forget it. And I don't know if I can forgive. They're 2 different things, forgiving and forgetting, 2 different things, and I don't know if I can do either one. So this is the Armenian life for us. Thinking back to all these massacres and not having relatives that we should have had. I never had a grandmother, I never had a grandfather. It's not easy. So I love my grandchildren and I give them all I can give them love. I love them to pieces because I never got it. So I do more for them than probably I would have done if I ever had a grandmother or a grandfather. That's a big loss. So my father survived hiding in the cemeteries. And he started walking and finally ended up in Istanbul, where he went to an orphanage and stayed there until he was 15. And I guess they had to leave at the age of 15. And him and a friend of his, whom he made a friend up in there, and they got into a boat. You know, there were stowaways. They didn't know where they were going. They ended up in Cuba.
Wow.
When they got there, they found that there were quite a few Armenians in there. And for the most part, the men would live in one room, 3 or 4 or 5 of them, and they would share the expenses, and that's how they started in Cuba. He got there and he started looking for his uncle, who was an uncle through marriage. And his wife, who was my father's aunt, had passed away, and he had remarried to Shamiram. And Shamiram Movsesian and her family sponsored me, and I came to the US. I ended up in New York where they lived, and they were wonderful people. I didn't know them at all, but when I met them, they made me feel like I was part of their family. And at that point, I felt that I had a grandmother and a grandfather, because that's how they treated me, like a grandmother and grandfather. And their daughter and son, you treated me like a sister. And to this day, Alice Movsesian is my cousin, even though she really isn't. And I love her to pieces. And this is how the Armenians survived, going from one country to other, not knowing what to expect, what to do, but always trying to get to the US, most of them. All the Armenians in Cuba, which were 3,000 by the time I was like 10, there were 3,000 Armenians in Cuba. I would say 99.5% of them ended up in the US. Most of them in Detroit, Philadelphia, and Rhode Island. And this is our lives.
And what year was that, you think, around what?
I came to the US in 1957. After my father settled himself in Havana, he met my mom. They got married, and my uncle Movsesian had sent him some money to come to the US, but by the time the quarter came up, they had already had 4 children, so that was impossible for them to leave. But from day one, all we heard was, don't get involved with anyone here, because you're not staying here, you're going to the US. And then we finally did. My sister came first. My sister Rose, she was the oldest girl. Then myself, 9 months later. 3 months later, my brother, who was the oldest, and my parents stayed behind with my youngest sister, Zabel. And they went through Castro's regime for 5 years. My brother had joined the army, and he was able to claim them. And 5 years after, they were here, reunited with their family again. And they saw their grandchildren being born. They enjoyed them for a good 10 years, 15 years. And then my mom passed away. My dad passed away 10 years later. I know Armenian, Spanish, and English.
That's it?
Well, I can understand, because of my Spanish, I can understand Portuguese and Italian. It's very close. And even French, it has a little bit. But Italian and Portuguese come easy to me.
Ishkambultitem tuk ashkatumek Hispanen masneket kaya?
Yeah, I interpret and interpret and translate for special ed children, for the parents, not for the children, for the school department in Peabody, where my husband was a teacher for 37 years. His name was Arthur Peretzian, very well known in the city. Yeah, and we have 3 children, Tom, Anita, and Mary, and we have 5 grandchildren. But he's gone now for 7 years, so it's difficult, but you get used to being alone. And my family's always around me, which I'm thankful for that. The Movsesian family happens to be a very different family. They were very much to help people, asgain, inchor gatsan anel rin. They not only helped me, they helped hundreds and hundreds of people. And the whole family is that way, was and is, because Alice is still helping people. She has put her heart and soul into helping the children in Armenia. She's done a tremendous job doing things that were impossible for anybody else to do. She has donated her life to helping people. And her whole family was the same. They just helped whoever they could. Anyone who came to the U.S. and had to end up in their house first until they got themselves settled. And from there on, they would go on with their lives, but they ended up first in Alice's, the Movsesian's home. These people were unique, and she is unique, extremely intelligent, and works very hard to do whatever she can for someone else.
My name is Alice Movsesian. I was born July 5th, 1932 in New York City in a home, not in a hospital, because my mother had twins that she needed to take care of, nobody to take care of them. In Washington Heights, which is Upper Manhattan. Okay, so Jenna Berberian knocked on the Armenian Assembly door. The office at that time for the Armenian Assembly was on Oliverdi Street, not too far from the square where the Armenia Hotel is. And she told Matthew that she had an 11-year-old son who had 3 months to live because his valves had gone bad. He had had rheumatic fever, and he was at the Arapgir hospital, and there was many other children like him there. Matthew called Arthur and I up to tell us what was happening. At the same time, he said what he said about Vartan, that the child's name was Vartan. So what Arthur and I did was that Arthur immediately called up Deborah Hospital in New Jersey and said that we had a child that needed 2 valves, that had had rheumatic fever, and he was in Armenia where the earthquake had happened. And Deborah Hospital said, bring him in 2 weeks. So we got together and we contacted the Minister of Health, etc., etc. Oleg Rehejan from the AGBU was going to Armenia, so we asked her if she could bring Vartan back. And what happened is that as Vartan came, other people knocked on the Armenian Assembly door, and then when Arthur went to Armenia, everybody started questioning him that there was a big problem with children that were born with heart condition, not even rheumatic fever, but they were born with heart condition, and there was no cure for them. So Arthur and I believe Armin Badigyan went around into the hospitals and looked, and they picked McCallion Hospital and asked McCallion if they could start working there. And the reason that they picked McCallion Hospital was because that was a Soviet-built hospital by Moscow, and the operating rooms and everything had the walls, it was easy to keep. It was all tile and everything, so you were able to keep it clean. So while Vartan was here, Vartan came September 19 1989. He stayed 3 months.
Yeah, almost.
Okay, they changed 2 of his valves. And we got so we found a few doctors, including Mikhailian and Karen Kurdov. So Karen Kurdov, who was working at Mikhailian Hospital, he was a young cardiology surgeon. However, in the old Soviet Union, only the head doctor did the surgery. The young surgeons, weren't really allowed to touch. Once in a while, they were allowed to maybe open, but they really weren't allowed to touch. So what happened was that he started examining children and sending us videos, and we started finding different hospitals. And that was, at this time now, it was Arthur Halvagian and I mostly, the 2 of us. And then we contacted George Asadurian in Cleveland, because we got Rainbow Children's Hospital, who had helped us with the earthquake, to now help us with the heart. And this young doctor there by the name of Kenneth Zakar did maybe 25 or 30 some odd children for us. And a young doctor named John Alexander, who was at SUNY Brooklyn, did about 18 or 20. But all in all, we did about 100 earthquake children, and we brought 450 heart children to the United States until we were able to open our own hospital in Armenia. And this is how that happened. And Arthur Halvagian always used to say to me, God is our partner. He's always been our partner, because what would happen is that, I know I'm jumping around, but we would be going to the Kennedy Airport to pick up children, and that most of the children that we were bringing now that had heart defects were very young. They were 3.5, they were 4 and whatever. And we bought 1 or 2 parent, and then we decided not to, because it became like a shopping spree then. So we decided to bring the children by themselves. So we would either send someone over there to bring the child, or at that time there was so many people going and coming, priests, whatever, that there was always someone that would bring them and take them home. So Arthur and I started talking to the doctor at Deborah Hospital, actually the president. He wasn't the doctor. Actually, he was a funeral director. Anyway, he wanted to do some operations right in Armenia. So we were very happy about that. But then what happened was that he had a doctor working with him that already from Georgia, from Tbilisi. So he decided that they would go to Tbilisi instead of coming to Armenia, but that they would do some Armenian children. So they went to Tbilisi to check on the hospital, and then they came to Armenia and they did the catheterizations, which in Armenian they call zunt, the catheterization machine. And Mikhailian had one that was very, very, very old, but that was the only one that there was in Armenia. So they did catheterizations, and they picked 5 children. And we made a deal with Deborah. They said to us that they could get the equipment to send to Tbilisi. And so we asked him, what happens to the machinery after it goes to Tbilisi? And he says, well, I guess it's going to have to stay there, because we're not going to have a way of bringing it back. So Arthur right away said, we'll pay for the shipping to Tbilisi, for the machinery, because we knew UAF would do it for us. But when the operations are finished, we want Armenian Airlines to come and pick up the machinery and take it to Armenia. And they agreed. So what happened is that in September of 1990, we went to Tbilisi. Arthur Halvagian, myself, and Armen Bedigian went to Tbilisi. We went on Lat's airline. They stopped at the Ukraine, and the Minister of Health of Ukraine came to the airport to see us, because I think they wanted to see if they could have any children then. And then we rode right to Tbilisi. When we got to Tbilisi, they did 5 Georgian children and 5 Armenian children. And we got all the young Armenians that lived in Tbilisi to guard the machinery when the operations finished, because everybody was trying to steal it. It was like, it was unbelievable. We had like a wall of guards of all the youth of Georgia, Vrastan, that were Armenian. And we got it through this nice young man who happened to be, had a part of the police department there. He doesn't want me to give his name, so I'm not giving his name. So the Armenian Airlines came and they picked up the equipment and we took it to McCallion. And it was kind of very, very sad, even in McCallion and everywhere, because they were short of everything, you know, and even our disposables, like in Tbilisi, they wanted to steal them because they didn't know what it was, but it was, you know, conditions were so bad that it was... David Atarian had said to me that there's a young doctor whose name is Harai Hovagimian, who is now in Oregon, and he was working with Dr. Starr, and Dr. Starr was the godfather of the bypass. But Harai did, you know, pediatric and adult. He did transplants. He did everything. So he said to me, get in contact with him, you know, and maybe he says, Alice, if you see him, you'll know him because he interned in New York City. So I procrastinated, and then all of a sudden I read in the Armenian Reporter that this young, older Armenian man had been taken care of by Harai Hovagimian through Carolyn Nigerian and George, who were going to Armenia a lot from Boston. So I called up, or Arthur called up Carolyn and George and said, Carolyn, why don't you tell Hovagimian about what we're doing and maybe we can, you know, get together and he can help us. Well, before she got a chance to do that, it was 1991 and I'm in California, and I pick up the phone and I just called Harai in Oregon and I said to him, my name is Alice Movsesian, this, that. And he said to me, oh, he said, I'd be very, very interested. And he said, I'm going to Armenia in October for the first time with the Armenian Assembly. And I said, oh, that's wonderful. I said, Arthur Halvagian and his wife are going on that same trip. It was the first Armenian Assembly trip to Armenia. I said, and you know, he could tell you what's happening. So what happened was that Arthur took Harai to McCallion Hospital, and Harai saw what was going on, and he decided that he would be very, very interested, that he would bring his crew and they would do something. So I would say February of 1992, when the lights were out and there was no heat and everything, Harai and his Oregon crew for the first time came to Armenia, and we did 11 closed heart operations. And this is what the children gave me to thank me for their first operation. And then Harai went back with his crew, and plus, oh, before I jump to that, I want to say that Karen Kurdov, who was a pediatric heart surgeon, told us that this Vilik Manugyan, who at that time was in Vilnius, Lithuania, that Vilik's hands were better than his. And he said, I think it would be better if we could talk to Vilik to come and try to be, you know, to learn under Harai Hovagimian, and I will be the pediatric cardiologist. He says, because his hands are much better than mine. So that's what happened. Vilik came, and a few other people, and Harai did his operation in April. He did 11 open heart children, and he had Vilik with him there, and he saw how much Vilik was good, and Vilik became part of the hospital. And then unfortunately McCallion died, and the new person that came to McCallion was giving us a difficult time and whatever, so we decided that we had to move and go into a smaller hospital where we could have better control. So we found the second children's hospital, which is in North Marash, next door to the infectious disease hospital. And we asked the Denoren there, her name was Muradyan, and she agreed. So we moved our facilities there. And what we did was, so that was April 1992. I'm not sure. I think Harad came 2 more times and then he decided to stay. So Harad Hovagamian gave up his practice in Oregon. We made an apartment for him. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. We made an apartment for him in the hospital, and I be to this day, which is over 22 years, he's still there. At the same time, we got a new Armenian pediatric cardiologist from the United States by the name of Harad Garabedyan in 1992 also, who started coming with us and who got us the first angiogram, the first, we didn't have any. And he started getting, and then Dr. Zaka from Rainbow came, and he started bringing his crew. And and then Harad came and he stayed. And George Asadurian from Cleveland started helping us too. So the committee for the Armenian medical outreach was Arthur Halvagian, Alice Movsesian, Harad Garabedyan from Spokane, Washington, George Asadurian from Cleveland, Ohio, more than anyone else. And we stuck together, and we had a few fundraisers, and little pennies money was coming in, and we were doing okay. But the reason that we did so well is because, one, we got Harad Hovagimian, to stay in Armenia, and number 2, we all paid our own way. So was us going to Armenia, paying our own way, and every money and every penny that we collected, we spent on medical outreach for the children. So Harad Hovagimian is still there. It's over 20 some odd years. He comes home 2 months out of the year, sometimes 1 month at a time, Christmas in the summer, so that he can keep his license. And he keeps in touch with the hospital, and they supply us with many things. And Harad Garabedyan, who is the pediatric cardiologist from Spokane, Washington, for the last 22 years has been going twice a year to show the new things. And now his son Carl is also a pediatric cardiologist, and Carl has been going too. And in fact, I believe last year the president of Armenia, Sarkeesian, gave Harad Garabedyan some kind of an honor, and in Armenia they call Harad Hovagimian the God, Asvaz. UAF helped us for 2 or 3 years, I forget now, I'd have to look at the records, paid the salary for the doctors at the hospital so that we didn't have to worry about how they were going to get paid. And the hospital is run like an American hospital. They can't take graft, they can't do anything like that. Everything has to be under our system. And the other thing that we made sure is that the hospital will always belong to the government, and it couldn't be privatized, so that the government will always have the hospital. What Arthur Halvagian and I wanted was to make Yerevan and Armenia the Mayo Clinic of the Govgas, because the Armenians are good in medicine, the ones that have learned. I forgot to say that was one of the other things that we had trouble picking, but we did pick them, because once you find, we had to make sure that it was a doctor that actually went to medical school and had not bought his diploma. And since we got some good doctors, they knew who to pick. And now what they do is they do many things. There's other people from different countries come and are taken care of there. There's children from different countries that come in and taken there. And one other thing that they do, they said that America did for them, so they are doing it for everyone else, is that from the CIS countries like Uzbek and Kazakhstan and places like that, they bring pediatric cardiologists and teach them from 3 to 4 months. And then this way, when they need to have surgery for their children, they send their children to Yerevan, to our hospital, which now is called Nork Marash Siddhabanagan Center. One other thing we did is that we brought 18 other doctors that were gynecologists and pediatricians and whatever, all to Albany State. And that was through Dr. Murad Ajamoli, who was a wonderful doctor. Unfortunately, we lost him very early. He passed away. But he helped us bring 18 doctors there who worked around like pediatricians and gynecology, anything to do with children. And that was the only other thing we did. And today, Nork Marash Hospital is as good as any hospital in the United States, and we're very, very proud of it. Okay, I want to say that if it wasn't for Arthur Halvagian, medical outreach would not have existed. It was his push and everything. Unfortunately, 3 years ago, we lost him. And even as he was sick, dying from leukemia, he was still worried about what he could do to improve our conditions there.
Okay.
Arthur Halvagian was the strong force that, got us involved with the earthquake in Armenia. And unfortunately, 3 years ago, we lost him from leukemia. And even while he was sick and suffering from leukemia, he was still always concerned how much more we could do for them, for the children, because we decided to help the children. Oh, I forgot to say that, because when we decided to get involved, we thought, where should we go? And then we decided with the children, because the children were the future of the nation. When Jenna Berberian came and told us about her sick child, later on, many of the other children with rheumatic fever we brought to America, or we did in Armenia. And the mothers of those children always said that they used to laugh at Jenna, because Jenna wrote to the United Nations, she wrote to Gorbachev, she wrote to everyone trying to get help for her children. And she said, we used to laugh at her, and look at that, she saved our children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thank God all the time, because God helped us find Harar Garabedyan, Harar Hovagemyan, and all the other wonderful physicians and people that helped us to make medical outreach possible and for Nork Marash Hospital to exist. Life makes things very different. I guess there's a different stage in everybody's life. Like the earthquake was right about when I was thinking of retiring, and I was in the middle of going to change jobs, and the earthquake happened. We were brought up to be Armenian Americans, to be good Americans first and Armenians second, but to be Armenians, And of course, I went to Armenian school 3 times a week. My Armenian school teacher was Varka Saharonyan, who was Avadi Saharonyan's son, and Dikranyan's wife, Dikranyan, who wrote the Anush opera, his sister. They were married to each other. So we learned a lot about our history. We went to Armenian school 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays after school. And on Fridays we learned Hayot Bat Matun. So we, or I and whoever went with me, we learned an awful lot. And our parents, in a very nice way, indoctrinated us to stay Armenian without us even knowing us, by making us join the AYF, by being involved with the Armenian youth. And then as we got older, how should I say, I became a board of trustee member for the St. Illuminator's Armenian Cathedral on 27th Street in New York City. It's the first Armenian cathedral in the United States. It's on the Gili Giatem. And then I became a delegate, which they call a Yerespoan, And now, after that, as the steps went on, the earthquake happened and different things happened, and there was ANC and there's whatever. And now, the only thing I'm involved with is the New York Armenian Home. I'm on the Board of Trustees of the New York Armenian Home.